I have seen an abnormal push toward athletics in the last 5 or 10 years. I've also seen how an overemphasis of athletics can rely heavily on the individuals or personalities. They can bring in students, increase the program, but on the flip side, when they leave, a lot of times those kids leave. I've seen schools where it takes years to recover from a culture that has pushed a little bit more to athletics more, I think, than it should. I just want to make sure we always encourage educators, administrators to do whatever they can to fight back against the travel ball athletics all the time, because I'm just not sure what we're seeing is maybe the best.
Welcome to the BJU Press Teacher Edition podcast, where Christian educators are encouraged and inspired as we bring you interviews, practical ideas, strategies, and answer your questions about teaching in today's culture. And here's your host, Jenny Copeland.
Have you ever been to a store thinking it was something? You were there to get something particular, only to find that it was something totally different. And not only that, but you were left thinking, I don't think they know their customers, or I don't even think they know the area where this store is, or they really need to update their look or update their inventory for their customers. It's so important that stores know their customers. They need to know what the customers are looking for. They need to know what the customer needs are and how to respond to those needs. And those needs change. But Christian schools have some of those same elements as well. We too need to know our customers and what they're looking for. And there's a caveat here, of course. We obviously can't and we shouldn't attempt to meet every need and every request of our customers. But regardless, we have to be connected to why families are even coming to schools and what they're hoping to find. We also need to identify our challenges, and these don't just apply to administrators or leadership, all the way from preschool to the senior sponsors. If we're going to be effective in a Christian school, we need a good understanding of who our customers are and what they're looking for, as well as be able to identify and respond to the challenges that we are facing in Christian education. And that is just the tip of the iceberg of what we're going to discuss today. Welcome back to the Teacher Edition podcast. I'm so thrilled you're here. It's exciting to hear from listeners across the country and hear how the Teacher Edition podcast is encouraging Christian educators in their classrooms. That's our goal. The heart of this podcast is to bring practical and uplifting episodes, all from a biblical viewpoint. Please help us continue to get the word out. We all know that a personal invitation or recommendation is impacting, and we appreciate those of you who have taken the time to share the podcast with others. Many of you have also found us on social media. We're Teacher Edition Podcast on Facebook, and on Instagram and TikTok, we are Teacher Edition Pod. Please also take a minute to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on a single episode. And while you're there subscribing, we would also be so grateful if you just take a minute to leave us a rating and a quick review. I was just mentioning the work of getting the word out about this podcast, and your ratings and reviews definitely help that. By the way, if you're listening to this podcast, you may want to jump over and watch this episode on our new YouTube channel, Teacher Edition Podcast. One last reminder, and that is to go to our website, teachereditionpodcast.com. You can get more information about the podcast, sign up for newsletters, submit questions, and even listen to the show right there. All right, I am so excited to have Jason Haas with us here on the show today. I've had the privilege of knowing Jason for many years. He is a fighter for Christian education and top-notch education, if I can add that. He earned a bachelor's, master's, specialist, and doctor's degree in education, and he pours himself into supporting Christian education. He has been with the North Carolina Christian School Association since 1999, first as the Director of Programs and Services, and now as the Executive Director since 2022. For NCCSA and for all Christian schools, he works so hard, not just those in his state, but also for those outside of North Carolina. But I must say that North Carolina, they have a top-notch association on all sides. No matter how you cut it, they do such a great job. He also serves on the board of directors for the American Association of Christian Schools. And on top of all that, he is a husband and a dad too. He and his wife have a daughter and identical twin boys. My interaction with Jason has been mainly in the area of professional development, as he's part of a team who oversees an annual multi-state teachers convention. I've also had the opportunity to work with him in launching a robotics competition as part of the North Carolina annual state competition that they have in the spring. Jason is a forward thinker. He's a great leader, strategically and as a problem solver, but also biblically. And today we're going to talk about trends in Christian education, and that's right up his alley. So I'm glad he's here. Jason, we're privileged to have you on the show.
Dr. Copeland, Jenny, thank you so much. It's been a privilege. I'm so glad to have known you for these years and in the ways you had mentioned. I'm so glad you've been able to partner with us at the convention and, as you mentioned, with the robotics area. And we're just so glad to have known you this long. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure, I've enjoyed it as well. So I introduced a few ideas at the start of the show, specifically the fact that it is essential that we as educators understand the current challenges facing Christian education and that we understand what parents are looking for in the current K-12 Christian school environment. So Jason, if you don't mind, let's talk challenges first. Just quickly off the top of your head, what are some of the top ones that come to your mind?
Well, I think the way you put it with the storefront and the customers is always the clearest way in the day and age we live to speak to educators and how students and parents are technically customers of ours. I think the challenges are certainly different for every school, and maybe even based on location, socioeconomic status of the families that are enrolled, historical culture of the school and the various niches that they have had. I think overall, the main challenges that I would think of would be schools having to maintain religious freedom and being centered on the proper spiritual formation values, which was the reason the school started. I believe the day and age we live in, maintaining areas of distinctiveness, areas of biblical integration, spiritual formation, classroom size, curriculum choices, so much more. We must be distinctive, and that can be a challenge. I believe it's a challenge to ensure a quality education. There's many reasons for that. I believe it can be a challenge to provide quality extracurricular activities, athletics, fine arts, and I know we'll want to discuss those later. I think being able to adapt and being able to integrate technology as well as being relevant in the quickly changing world we live in with the cultural landscape that seems to shift almost daily. There could be many more. Those would be the top challenges that I think most of the Christian schools that we interact with are facing today.
Okay, so one of the first areas that came to my mind was the culture around us, and you hit that nail right on the head. The pressure from different agendas and groups, even small groups that are so vocal these days. You know, you think they're huge, and then they're so small but so vocal, and honestly, even the government. So Jason, talk with us about what you're seeing in that area. Share with us your thoughts on how Christian schools can ensure that religious freedom is at the forefront of what they do and even protected from outside groups or even the government.
That's a great point. I think on purpose that has to be at the forefront. I mean, that really is the reason Christian schools were formed in the late 60s and 70s and even newer ones. This can affect areas of admissions, curriculum choices. I know in states like North Carolina where, and there's many others, where we have implemented school choice programs and private school students can now apply to receive funds to attend a Christian school. There's so much more attention given to the Christian school. The public school side seems to be very upset that funds are not going their way and going toward private schooling. And there is a worry that at some point the government may try to intrude in areas like admission policies, who you can have in your school. I mean, right now there are great laws in place, but religious freedom is one of the reasons that schools start, and it's really the primary reason associations like the NCCSA were formed. I believe in our mission statement or vision statement, it says very clearly that we're to protect the religious freedom of Christian schools. I think everything else that goes along with it is fantastic. But at the forefront, if we're not monitoring legislation, helping schools maintain religious freedom, it's for aught. And schools there's so many things they can do, from being in advocacy groups, having clear policies in their admissions documents that may help them later on if there are any legal challenges with admissions policies. And then, collaborate. We say it, and I know many people use this, but we are better and stronger together. I know in the NCCSA, we speak often about we want to have a large tent. We want even a larger tent. And we may not always agree on so many things that some may want to separate us, but we all can agree on religious freedom. And I like that you mentioned that at the very forefront. That has to be one of the main purposes, and unfortunately is a major challenge in today's Christian school landscape, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned. I hadn't really thought too much about that with the voucher programs and different things that are coming about. It really does draw more attention. We know that's frustrating the public school environment, but it really does draw attention. I can see how that could easily bring some fear, but it should also motivate us to protect those freedoms. So I'm glad you pointed that out. So we know, we've already kind of talked about it, that parents have a number of options when it comes to education. And I think you and I would be quite solid in our preferences, but that doesn't negate the existence of other options. So I'm sure you, like me, have heard the arguments for this private school having amazing athletics, or this public school as being is a magnet school for languages or technology or whatever. These are distinguishing characteristics, and honestly, they really can pose a challenge because they're alluring to families. But what about Christian schools? What are their distinguishing characteristics? Maybe we can phrase it this way: what are the main areas that we in Christian schools need to stand out and maintain distinction in the sea of educational opportunities? What do you think?
That's a very difficult question. I would say in our state, and I'm sorry if I refer to our association a lot because that's
fine,
really
fine.
mostly
Yes.
what I do. But we are extremely diverse, and they're certainly categorized all across the spectrum of conservative, less conservative, and I think it's important for schools to know what they're good in. I mean, certainly we have to be good in our mission and values, but most parents of today, especially those that aren't maybe in full-time, go to church a lot, they don't know what that means. So Christian school, it's all the same to them. Certainly we work with schools that I would think put the conservative Christian foundation and spiritual formation, biblical integration a lot higher on the spectrum and where it should be, in my opinion. Certainly we got to be distinctive in our educational program. And I think that can be right at 1B. I don't think one really needs to be above the other. It's always been a great argument. Would you rather be known as a Christian school that had chapel 5 times a week and low academics, or the complete opposite? And we all know schools that are on both ends of that spectrum. I think having a great mixture of that, and each school has to do that differently. What works at one school in a rural area where you typically see more conservative values, maybe lower attention, not bad, but just lower expectation, that's a better word, for the educational program versus a school in a large city. You're going to certainly have a higher socioeconomic, probably parents that maybe as a whole, some more education involved. So the education is going to rise a little bit more, but the extracurricular activities, the academic program, and then, we haven't even talked about the staff. I mean, the staff and having a qualified, caring staff has to be an area of distinction. And I think that's a way we can separate ourselves, certainly from other types of schooling, certainly non-religious schooling that I believe, because we should have the love of Jesus in our hearts, and we're all like-minded, and that should show from teacher to student, teacher to parent. I'm a parent, 3 kids, like you mentioned, so I live this day in and day out. But I do think those are some areas that can be major distinction between, and I don't want to name other types of school, but other non-religious types of schooling, things like that. Yes, ma'am.
So let's piggyback off of that, if you don't mind, and kind of break it down even a little further. What are your thoughts on the educational program itself? How important do you see that to be in the K-12 Christian school?
Well, if you ask me, I want to make sure the spiritual formation, the biblical integration's there. And then in the same breath, for me, I'm following that up with the educational program. I have friends that may follow that up with, what's your athletic program like? Or you might have some that say, what's your arts program like? I think education has to be at the forefront, and schools are doing the best they can. I think what you see is schools that focus primarily on hiring qualified teachers, making sure they're involved in some type of professional development, not being siloed off from every other school, and all they know is their school, and all they think is that they're doing a fantastic job. And when they ever go outside of that circle, sometimes they can be like, wow, we did not know other schools were doing this. And I do think having a qualified educational program, deciding what curriculum you need, there's all types, but certainly something from a faith-based center is important. I think involving technology in the day and age we live, how can you not? I don't understand how Christian schools are against that. We certainly still see that, and some of that is because of lack of knowledge of how to integrate, and I understand that. We're coming a long ways. I think COVID taught us a lot in a very fast, it was like a weekend, over a week, schools from Friday to integrate on Monday. I know the school I was at, I was on the advisory board at this school, and Sunday afternoon of church, we laid out all these plans, and emails go out Sunday night, and bam, it was in action Monday. So schools do the best they can. I think your higher end schools, certainly your larger ones, that can integrate technology properly in its proper place, not just throwing tools out. I think all of this in today's competitive landscape, as long as you can prepare the student for the next level in a Christian atmosphere, certainly not foregoing Christian morals, certainly not foregoing athletics, not foregoing arts, not foregoing extracurricular. But to me, education's got to be 1B. It's not a 2, it's a 1B. And I know that's can be a divisive comment even, but I think the overall education program has to be essential for nurturing minds, hearts, and preparing them for the next level.
Okay, so you said the magic words, athletics and arts. So why don't we loop back around to that? Because often we kind of run the gamut between looking at a school who has a lot of that and say, their priorities are out of line. And then we look and say, I kind of wish we had that. It is a lure to many schools. But how, in your opinion, how important is it to the Christian K-12 school?
It seems like athletics right now is the biggest draw to some schools. I don't think it's Christian ideals, Christian morals. I don't think it's education. It probably is education to an extent, but there's no other area in a school that can build overall excitement and partnership like athletics. And I know there's many benefits. I grew up in athletics. My kids, all 3 of them are in athletics. I'm probably coaching a game tomorrow in athletics. I mean, I love athletics. It has always been a part of our family. And I would say if a family has historically been involved in athletics, the parents, the older kids, and they are in a town and the school does not make athletics or arts, fine arts, a big part of their educational program, they're probably not going to go to that school. So it is a pull like no other. I know the benefits of teaching character and community and team building. You cannot replace that. I think it has its proper place. But I would say along that line, I admit that I think it's difficult for schools to know what the correct balance is here. I would admit, as an executive director of a Christian school association, I'm not sure we always get it right. We try. I feel sometimes we put too much effort, too much resources in athletics, and then other times I feel we don't do enough. But we live in a consumer-driven world, and we are an association where schools choose to join us. There's not necessarily an allegiance like there would have been 25, 30 years ago, where you just want to be part of a group. You want to be part of like-minded schools. We have to give They buy, we give. And it's difficult because I have seen an abnormal push toward athletics in the last 5 or 10 years. And I've also seen how an overemphasis of athletics can change a school quicker than anything else. And overemphasis typically can rely heavily on individuals or personalities. And sometimes those individuals, high-level coaches, high-level ADs, and I'm not downing that. I think that's fantastic, but they can bring in students, increase the program. But on the flip side, when they leave, a lot of times those kids leave too. And I've seen schools where it takes years to recover from a culture that has pushed a little bit more to athletics more, I think, than it should. But again, I respect the autonomy of the school. If a school feels like that's what they need to do, in my role, we lay out the benefits, the membership services. This is a crude example, but we explain it as a buffet. We'd love every school to come by and get something of every single trade. Some don't. Some just want to be part of a group. But those that join for areas just like athletics, it can be a difficult partnership because, again, that's a consumer-driven benefit. You don't like something, we're not going to stay. And so I have a love-hate with athletics. I love what it's done for my family growing up. I wouldn't have made it without it. I love how it is a niche for today's Christian school when used correctly. I just want to make sure we always encourage educators, administrators to do whatever they can to fight back against the travel ball, AAU, challenge, classic, whatever model of athletics all the time, because I'm just not sure what we're seeing is maybe the best, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, it definitely does. It is a major draw. I mean, that's realistic. And I like how you mentioned, too, that there are potential issues with not offering that. You know, if you're in a town or with a group of people who that is, and you don't have that, that can be an issue. You started to touch on a few things that were potential drawbacks of placing too much emphasis on even fine arts or athletics. Do you have anything else you wanted to add to that? I just want to loop back around there because I feel like we kind of touched on it a little bit. I like what you said about even, too, bringing in, you know, high-level coaches and players, and then when they leave, what is left, you know, in your school? And we see this in churches. You know, there are certain people that are the key people. When they leave, the church has a hard time functioning. Well, that happens in schools as well, like you mentioned. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
I've just seen it through the years.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm pretty closely related to our athletic program and our committee and all of those that are involved. And it just feels it's a different culture overall than it used to be. And I admitted at the beginning, I'm not sure necessarily if we're always doing right with how much focus we're putting toward it. Maybe we need more focus. It's certainly, if we canceled athletics, we would lose quite a few schools in our association.
Sure.
But I also don't want it to be the only reason a school joins. Going back to what we said earliest, if we cannot see that we have to be together for the fight for religious freedom. My dad, who you know, says this quite a bit, that when the barn's not on fire, there's not really a lot of loyalty or partnership. And we say sometimes we like when there's some legislative issues because
yeah, it rallies the troops.
We love y'all, and we get, you know, non-members contacting us all the time, and we're in a time of the barn's not on fire right now. And I'm not wanting it to be. We're not wanting new work necessarily, but to keep that at the forefront of our administrators when everything's going well, you know, enrollment's up, money is possibly better than it has been in 5 or 10 years. It's hard to keep that at the forefront versus these other areas.
These are all so true, but what does a Christian school do to get students, like to attract and retain them? This is where we're going to pick up next time as I continue my conversation with Jason. Listeners, don't miss out. We are also going to talk about what families are looking for in Christian schools. It's so easy to think we know that. We know what they're looking for, and we're offering that. But really, are we? How can we know that without knowing what they're genuinely looking for? There's this, and there's much more to come in part 2 of this episode, so don't miss out. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you were challenged and encouraged as I was. Remember to go to teachereditionpodcast.com to submit questions for upcoming episodes. Of course, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on social media. Now, it's time to get back to your day, but it's not just any day, because every day in the classroom is your day to impact and inspire through God's power and through His grace working in you. Now, go do what God has called you to do.